This is the 17th of November, 1970, our first talk to the FEBC students. Basically, I just want to say hello. I can't talk. Just basically, I want to say hello. That's better. That's better. And some of you have been in a state of study away without talking to Ron about your troubles. And I thought it was about time that we broke the ice here a little bit and gave you some inkling of where we are going to and why you were here. You probably know that already. But I know better why you were here than I knew previously. We are in quite a year here in 1970. We are in quite a year. This year didn't look like it was going to amount to much when 1969 was busy expiring. And the amount of admin and dev tea that's been going back and forth across the lines here didn't look like things were going so well. But the wild part of it is that 1970 has been about the biggest breakthrough year in terms of administrative technology and in actual fact, of auditing technology that we have had since 50, easily. Give you some kind of an idea, I was just breaking through 9 and 10 OT levels. You've never even heard of them. But our lower level technology is now putting into view an ideal and a dream which we sometimes see, but which doesn't work out consistently in organizations. And we feel that by processing an organizational staff member's efficiency and ability to get his job done will be improved. And we've often dreamed of that, and we very, very often see it lay an egg. We audit the guy, and he doesn't, he feels better, he's happier, and he still turns out a product that's an overt act. So, there is in the works right this minute, and is in test on flag, a relatively simple technology which puts that dream well within your possession at a fairly low level of auditor training. And now when you're working in the field, when you're working in orgs, you don't necessarily, well, actually it's probably completely impossible to read all of the material that comes through your lines or to keep genned in on what is going on. You actually have the public banging on your front door, and you have all of the generated noise of the disorganized, unrecruited, undermanned, misfiled organization in your vicinity, and you have all kinds of demands coming in. One day somebody counted these and said there were 29 command channels into a single org. You were taking orders, an org was taking orders from 29 separate sources. And that would be enough that alone would give you enough noise to distract your attention from the fact that something is going on other than that fight. And there's been plenty that's been going on. Now, you come here to flag, and you find that in the sunny, calm atmosphere of nowhere much, this noise drops out of your ears and off of your eyeballs, and you have a chance to draw a long breath and put your attention on what is going on. So you're actually jumping a considerable gap, and so on. There's a considerable gap. You've seen some of this information, which you're getting here, come through your lines. the opportunity to see it assembled and coordinated has been practically zero. To see it in action and see how it all fits together is quite another thing. Now, you're here at a time when, and this will always be true, where organization is being improved. And organization command channels at this moment are just now going out into a very much smoother state of organization. For instance, just now, I've just pulled out of my traffic here a dispatch from the Data Bureau, Los Angeles, and the head of the Data Bureau said, "We are now able to provide you any information you care to have on any U.S. org." Wow. Now, that isn't just information. That's evaluations of information. That's condensed packs. They're in business now to be able to give us extreme condition packs on anything. Well, that's a terrific advance. The officers of some of the areas of these liaison offices have just now left. 3 of them left this morning. And the org board of the bureaus just now been hung up. So you're here at a very opportune time. This is the time this is being exported. Now, the pattern on which we're operating is something that you should have some information on. And this pattern itself is of importance, and it will serve you in your stead. There is an FSO called Expand and Control. And that gives the sequence of expansion. And that is, we'll put a flagship here, and the flagship puts a flag org here, and the flag org puts control points in continental areas, and those control points in continental areas put orgs there, and the orgs put a public there. I want you to look at this as a sequence of action, and perhaps it'll give you some idea of what's behind some of the things you see going on. Now, as far as you in your future position, you will be putting there what there is where you are. And from that firm position, we'll be putting there an extended position. Now, that even applies to divisions. You put there a stable terminal from which you can expand by putting in stable terminals to expand to. Now, this then makes a sequence of stable terminals. Now, you're looking at it here on flag on a planet-wide basis. In an area, you look at it on an area basis. In an org, you look at it at a divisional basis. And it all works the same way. You will only get trouble from those areas where you have not taken those steps. And if you're getting trouble from any area, then you have not taken those steps. So you go back and you set up an office, and then from that you set up an HCO, and from that you set up this division, that division, the other division. And all the time you're doing this, of course, you have to cope with anything that is going on. It's about 50% organize and 50% handle what's going. All right. Now, let's say something goes wrong. Let's say something goes wrong. You just don't seem to ever be able to get in the public divisions. And the next thing you know, you're out on the street handing out cards. An org board not only reads from left to right, an org board slides from left to right. and you can slide down that org board faster than scat. We have a standing joke on ships of me trying to figure out, while single-handedly conning the ship, how to also stir the crew's soup. Now, that is a matter of just sliding down org boards. Now, the sequence is one that is often missed. And the reason why it gets missed is an individual has his attention way over there. And he seldom puts his attention right here. Now, we've all seen the housewife who has a great deal to say about their neighbors. And then one day we open the closet door, and last year's diapers and everything else falls out on the floor. We don't even dare open the front door of such a house. Now, it is one of the things that we do on flag consistently and continuously is reassert the idea, if we can't make it go right here, we have no right whatsoever telling anybody else elsewhere to make it go right. And that's a good maxim anywhere you operate. So one day you find yourself sliding down the org board. By all means, handle the situation, but always put in two other steps. Is your house in good order? Are your lines straight? Does your in-basket hand contain stale dates? Are your lines running smoothly? If you straighten that out, why, you will also be able to organize then the area which you're having so much trouble handling. So cope. There's always cope. And the other steps are put your own immediate area straight and organize and put there the area you're having trouble with. They're coping, you're coping in your own area. That will continue. There's always a little bit of cope. Like Procter & Gamble's Ivory Soap, 99 and 44/100% pure. I don't think we'd ever get so organized that we wouldn't have that remaining percent impure. It would still be cope. Because in any expansion, this trick always occurs. It's a horrible thing. You think you've got it all organized, and then because you've got it organized, it expands. And any expansion will find every weak spot you've got, and there will be a blow-up at every one of those weak spots. And you could actually go in some kind of a wild cycle like this if you weren't completely organized and if you didn't know instinctively exactly what to do about any given situation. You're doing all right now. You've actually got your cash bills ratio, so it is in some kind of a state. You know what it is, and you're actually getting in some traffic. The org seems to be viable, and then suddenly you get more traffic. And the more traffic catches you without an expansion potential. You didn't have anybody in training to take over some of those extra spots. You didn't have any backlog of auditors that you could call on. Lately, the Academy hasn't been graduating many people. There aren't many auditors to grab onto. Nobody has been trained in case supervision to take over that course. And it goes... Now, if you're on the ball, you will be able to organize it sufficiently so that it doesn't go backwards. But the cycle that's liable to happen is the additional traffic and additional business hits you. All the spots around the organization that are slack or sour or could go sour, that were just barely functioning, blow up. And you retract. You don't expand, you contract. So you try to expand again, and there's more traffic, And it blows up the remaining spots, and now you really contract, and you don't do a job of expansion. You do a job of starting to expand, contracting, starting to expand, contracting. And if you do that, actually you go downhill, because people get tired and they wear out. So, what you do is you have to be sufficiently on the ball that every time such areas blow up, and they will blow up, you're right on the ball, you know exactly what you've got to do at this particular stage of the game, and you beef that area up so that it copes and organizes quickly to take up the slack, and you hold that expansion. And the next time there's a little bit more expansion, things start to blow up, you're sufficiently on the ball so that you cope with it, get it organized, and it'll hold. And that is the cycle, actually, which an FEBC student should realize he's being trained to do. He's not being trained to be a good student. He's trained to be somebody who is on the ball so that at any given instant, where he can cope and get organizational steps into it fast. There's two horrible errors that you can make. One is to do nothing but organize. And you can go on doing nothing but organize. You know, the art definition, the definition of art, or communication. It's an acceptable communication, you see. And you'll get amongst artists perfectionists. And they never do release one of their pictures. The author never does publish one of his stories, because it isn't perfect yet. Now, you can get that same frame of mind in the field of organization, and it is absolutely gruesome. The organization isn't ready to go yet. It isn't well enough organized. They don't have enough auditors trained yet to really put out the publicity, because it isn't well enough organized. That's a wonderful way to die. The first Los Angeles Foundation, not under my control, the first Los Angeles Foundation at 2600 South Hoover failed because the head of it, who, by the way, was a rear admiral and retired from the Navy, closed it for 10 days to find out if the legal organization was correct. There was no threat. There was nothing happening. But it just wasn't well enough organized. And they accumulated an indebtedness from which they never recovered. Their payroll was too high. They just shut the doors for 10 days. We have organizations in South Africa which closed their doors a couple of weeks a year, or used to, and went on a holiday. And all of that was great, except if you just look over their stats, you'll find out that it takes them ages after that to get the stats going again. An organization's a running machine. And when you hold it up, it seems to get sand in its wheels. Now, it's perfectly all right for people to go on vacations, but what are you doing not being well enough organized that half the organization can't go on the vacation, and the other half go on the other vacation? I mean, why aren't you organized that way? That's all a point in organization. So organization is basically foresight and prediction, and putting in stable terminals that will handle the flows. Now, there are better definitions and more precise definitions of organization, but if you study from that point of view, you will have a lot of success. What belongs where? You will be interested to know that a lot of propaganda set in the last few years concerning policy. Policy tended to drop out of sight. It tended to vanish. It wasn't given adequate importance. And just as happened in tech at St. Hills, people began to say that is old policy. I don't know, maybe they were like auditors that thought that technology was simply a process, and you simply read the process off the bulletin, and then somehow or other auditing occurred. But they didn't know why it occurred, and they had nothing to do actually with the session except to mouth these magic phrases. The truth of the matter is that the admin tech is a thing not which you learn by rote, but which you get the theory background of. Why is it? Let's weigh. And all of a sudden, somewhere along the line in the study of it, your wits will suddenly congeal, and you suddenly know how to play the piano. It isn't that you are being told how to play the piano by applying certain policies. Your familiarity with that line of country and your familiarity with that basic line of country at any given instant will go into play. I don't know if you ever rode a bicycle, but there's something funny about bicycles. Is you can't ride a bicycle, you can't ride a bicycle, you can't ride a bicycle, but there's more skinned knees and bruised knuckles and sister being impatient and all that. And then all of a sudden, you can ride a bicycle. Well, that's what you're trying to do. That's what you're trying to do. And you won't ride this bicycle if you have to say to yourself, it's a good thing to know where this material is, let me tell you. But if you have to say to yourself, I think there was a policy covered this situation, and there was some regulation there, and of course our Mimeo, but we haven't had anybody in Mimeo files for some time, so we haven't got a pack of policy. And I wonder what it was. By that time, there's footprints all over you. Now, what you're really trying to do is get enough background know-how so that you know how to put an organization there, how to organize something, how to square it around, and you'll be able to know whether it's on policy or off policy, and so on. And you'll know basically that if it doesn't work, it's probably off policy. Whether somebody got some kind of a wild idea. And it isn't a matter of memorizing a fabulous quantity of material. You have to know all the material. But it is a matter of being able to both know it and apply it, but apply it in such a way as you develop the instinct of it. It has to be down to instinct level, not lip reading level. I mean, you're not put your tongue in your teeth, trying to. Well, I wonder if there wasn't something that had something to do with this. They seem to have some kind of trouble in that. I wonder if there isn't something somewhere in policy that says how you solve it. And stats were down last week, and you'd be in a bad show. Now, you have to be able to dish it out. You have to be able to dish it out fast. You have to be able to dish it out off the cuff. You have to be able to whip up an organizational structure at the drop of a hat. It's very, very interesting that the Flag Bureau Org Board, which is just being published just now, is the 1966 compilation 7-division Org Board. Now, also, don't get in the frame of mind, and if you've seen it around, banish it, that runs like this. This policy letter is very vital. It should be reissued. What's this reissue? We've had one or two FEBC students show up and tell us that certain 65 policy letters should be reissued because they're still valid. It's very funny, but the first rundown of organizations that was ever written up in 1950, oddly enough, is still valid. I was reading it the other day. I was quite amazed. Now, so here's a 7-division org board. Now, the only thing the flag bureaus will do with that org board is just like it says in policy letters. Just like it says a production division can be any production. So what's the production of a flag bureau? The production of a flag bureau is data, action, communication. That is what it is doing. The data bureau, of course, brings in its data. It makes its collection, condensation of the data, evaluation of the data, and distribution of the data. That is what it does. And when that's done, it goes to the Action Bureau, which does planning, briefing, and firing. And then when it's all ready to go there, it goes to the Comm Bureau, which is the External Comm Bureau. HCO still handles its internal comm and internal transport and so on. But this is external comm. And external comm has the traffic outgoing, has the missionaire outgoing, has all of that outgoing and everything that's incoming. And that's its production. The end product of that is management. The other divisions all have to be there just to back it up. It's an interesting little clock if you look it over. Now, you in an org don't have anything to do with putting that together particularly, but one of these Flag Bureau org boards belongs in the department of the LRH Comm. The whole org board belongs in there. If you have a liaison office section in your org, that is the org board he will be operating on, which is quite remarkable. That org board was the summation of the experimental org board. All the other divisions was a summation of the experimental org board of 1965, and when it was all whipped together and we changed everything, Mary Sue actually wrote it up. They actually lost one of her divisions, Treasury Division. We're having to rewrite it at this particular time. Fortunately, somebody copied it with variations, and it's preserved so she can put it back. But we've still got this org board. Now, that org board was running at the heyday St. Hill, when it had very, very high stats. When they started moving off of this org board and it started getting lost and people started talking about policy getting old and all this technique came out last year, we don't use that anymore. Yes, here's all of your material, but we don't use it now. That was what got going. Yes, well, that's old. The only reason you're studying the St. Hill course is for historical information. That's true. True, I'm giving you actual quotes. I'm not even exaggerating. The tech was driven out, and that was basically why things went downhill. They lost tech. But why run any shame, blame, and regret on it? The truth of the matter was that we got it back. Now we're getting some protests about so many changes. Yeah, we're going to change it. I don't really see how this is such a remarkable change to get back everything we all had. It doesn't seem to be reasonable. The other day, with only a couple or three paragraphs changed, I reissued Power Processing as it was originally done and written, and it was received with vast acclaim as a brand new development. So all of a sudden here we see the 66 org board, 7-division org board. We looked everywhere, did anything we can. We have had some of the wildest org boards here on Bureau org boards you ever saw in your life. Nobody can make a head or tail out of them. They didn't dovetail. And finally, well, I was able to push into place the old 7 Division org board, and it did it. And that works, and that's going in right this minute. So you see, the material you're studying is not of historical interest. It's the very thing which you need at that desperate moment when you suddenly find out that you have 129 PC backlog, which has carefully been hidden from you for the last 2 months. And this arises because the public divisions are doing nothing. And finally, in desperation, you ask somebody in the public divisions, why aren't you carrying out your routine functions? And they say, well, it doesn't do any good to promote, don't you see? Because we just get more PCs in, and they can't be audited, so we don't have to work here for some time. We've done our work. Now you all of a sudden have a problem. You've got 3 auditors. It's dwindled down somehow. Nobody noticed. You've got 3 auditors in the tech sec, and there are 2 people in qual. And you all of a sudden have to deliver 795 hours of processing tomorrow. How do you do this? That's the type of problem that will all of a sudden hit you in the teeth. It's actually in the field and area of rather interesting discoveries. Discoveries like there hasn't been an internal comm run for the last 3 days. We can probably teach you not to issue an order like get in internal comm. Start delivering internal comm. That's just your COPE order. It's just the correction of an error, an omission, or an outpoint. That's just a COPE order. Your organizational action is entirely different. How come we didn't have any internal comm for 3 days? Now, if you don't have the expertise, you get into heavy ethics. When HCO isn't on the ball and the people in HCO don't know what they're doing, they inevitably will make the product of HCO ethics. And that has been going on now for about 2 or 3 years. This year, I called a halt. In other words, it's easier to hit than to hat. It's much simpler to hit than to hat. Commenting, shooting, firing, it's much easier. It's much easier to do that than to investigate. Much easier to do that than to draw up the check sheets and put the hat on somebody. Do you follow? So you get the thing of an irreducible minimum. The principle of the irreducible minimum. It hasn't been written up yet. You'll see this around, though we talk about it around here. The principle of the irreducible minimum of a post. A post tends to reduce to only its visible points. Let's take a steward now. Not worry about an organization. I might re-stimulate you. I wouldn't want to do that. And we take steward. And now the steward has a job of doing bob-off and bob-off and bob-off, and they're supposed to have the bob-off, and the linen is supposed to bob-off, and they're supposed to know where to get that. There's supposed to be certain check sheets and so on they do, and there's certain reports which they fill in and so forth. And there are many preparatory actions necessary to being a steward. It isn't just the cups and saucers and so forth or something like that appear on the table. You all of a sudden will get a cave-in this area, and you won't quite be able to figure out why. And the reason you can't quite figure out why is the visibility is still there. You've got cups and saucers sitting on the table. The job is dropped to its irreducible minimum, below which it will be noticed. And you'll get this tendency. It's a rather consistent tendency. It's a horrible tendency. So HCO is liable to drop to the irreducible minimum of internal calm. Somebody would notice that. Do you see what the principle is? In other words, all of the hidden or not too visible actions, or which is to say the preparatory actions that makes a good product, tend to drop away from a post and tend to drop away from an org. And you are wind up with the irreducible minimum, and that is merely the visible. Now this reverses. When you try to get the thing running, all the things that are out are invisible. So I assure you, you really have to know your business. Because the visibilities are still there. There are people at their desks. Mail does get opened and distributed. Now, if you really don't know your business and know what all these little points are and how you have to prepare an action before it becomes a production and so forth, this org could completely baffle you. There can't be anything wrong with it at all. It's in flinders, it's in shambles, its stats are going out the bottom, but people are at their desks, and everything you seem to look at seems to be there, all right. Don't open a file drawer. So what you've got is a reduction to the irreducible minimum. It just can't be reduced any further, otherwise it would be noticed. And you'll find out this is a tendency. So that sort of thing it's not the willfulness of people, it's actually a lack of full hat. It's a lack of people being ginned in and trained in. They don't quite know what the job is, so they just pick up the visibility. You know, they bring the mail into the org, but they don't log it. And then you madly are trying to find the missing money that came in from Mrs. Schultz. And where's the mail log? And somebody looks at you and says, huh? Or somebody looks at you brightly and says, oh, yes, well, here it is. And every day there's one entry and it says, mail received. Now, it's out of these things that disaster is made. Franchises can make a great deal of money, but they do not make a great deal of viability. They do not stand up over a long period of time. One of the reasons they make a great deal of money is because their prices are very often much higher than org prices. And there's a lot of other things with this way, and you say, now look, here's all this money. Remember, there's no viability goes along with it. To run an org, you have to run it at higher volume, and you have to run it at a very high volume, and you have to run it at a very excellent product. And if your product is excellent and your volume is high, you will be in clover just pocketing all of the loot in the world with all the quarters and so forth. But it has to be high volume, and when you get into high volume, you get into sophistication of organization. The receptionist can't sit there and keep it all in her head. So, therefore, we are going into the higher level of sophistication of how you run an org, and it can expand. And an org can expand on up the line. And if you follow the principles of organization, it can span on up the line that it makes Standard Oil look like a filling station. And if you don't know the principles of organization, it just won't expand, so it doesn't get up to a point where it can pay its staff members enough. It doesn't get up to a point where it can afford the things necessary to do. Nevertheless, even as they exist at this moment, they are very viable. We haven't lost any orgs except those which we ourselves closed out. Fantastic. Quite a record, actually. Now, been a lot of hard work. There's been a lot of tears. There's been a lot of sweat. has gone into keeping things running. Now, there's a way to run these things which makes them much more remunerative, which makes it much easier, and so on. And now is the time. Now I might as well tell you why it is that we are suddenly launching. It isn't just the technical breakthroughs. I'm putting together organizational material and making some breakthroughs, partially in self-defense, partially getting stuff together and so forth so we can teach in FEBC. There have been many series of things released here. There's a personnel series, the org series. Part of it's the PR series, the organizing series. These things are quite vital information. And it isn't because they're newest and best. People around here very often are saying, but you wrote all this in 1958. I say, yeah, I know. But it's put together in a cohesive package, and there have been here and there an improvement in the communication of it. And the improvement in organization is the communication of it. Now, if I'm writing now, and you get a big cognition on the fact that it's putting an org board together is a matter of products. It's a product. It's a product and a product and a product, and so forth. Look at the 66 org board, and you'll find out that its items are all expressed as products. But it had not been stated. Learning how to communicate something to somebody else is very often a bit of a breakthrough in itself. So you'll find some of this material has never been communicated, but is inherent in the policy which you are already to some degree familiar with. I don't wish to get you clouded up on this. It isn't that the materials are not valuable which are being released, but they are an extension of the materials which already exist and are being gotten together and are being used so that they will communicate. I discovered about 8 or 9 months ago that there were certain chaps around who just couldn't seem to get the idea of what an organization was, or what organizing was, or what did organizing consist of, do you follow? And I just found out that I just was not getting that across. Didn't find it out in an org, found it out in an engine room. And so I just started tentatively trying to improve the communication of what an organization was, and then found out that I was in conflict with think. I found out there was an identification between a suggestion, an order, and a comment. These were all the same. A broad policy that covered all situations was exactly the same as some casual comment. No difference. And I finally figured out that, well, we had better find something about logic. And about April, I rolled up my sleeves and tackled this subject as a subject. And they've written an awful lot about logic. It's a formidable subject. If you want just an exercise in headaches, open the Encyclopedia Britannica and read what it says about logic. Just the Encyclopedia Britannica, condensed version. Man didn't know what logic was. He had no idea what logic was. He had some formulas for logic, each one of which could be thrown aside by the disarrangement of data. Ah, well, if the whole subject of logic could be thrown aside by data, what was he doing studying formulas when he should be just studying what is data? That made a breakthrough. And that pushed us ahead quite a bit. So that was a complete development all by itself. You'll find in an organization that your trouble is as simple as you have people who cannot distinguish an order from a comment, a policy from a suggestion. These are A equals A equals A, don't you see? Well, how do you pry this apart? Actually, we have the technology by which it is pried apart. It's relatively simple technology, fortunately. And we haven't published a final text on this yet. Actually, it's sitting here on my desk because it was advertised before it was complete, and I hadn't realized anybody had offered it for sale. That's somebody really putting the crush on you. I haven't finished this subject up. And they say, it's all for sale. Great. Oh, boy. So, the subject of logic has a great deal to do with the subject of communicating data. You find out it makes a wild view when you all of a sudden find out that they're putting all the typewriters on the floor and so forth, and you find out that somebody simply casually remarked that if they wanted to clean the desktops, why, they could put the typewriters on the floor. See, suggestion. The guy said, we never can mop these desks, you see. So, well, you put typewriters on the floor and so on. You come back in, and all the typewriters are on the floor, and they've been on the floor for about a day or two, and somebody says, where's your letter stat? And it's gone. And why is it we can't type lying down here on the floor? And you say, who issued such a silly, damned order as this? And they say, you did. You'll just be very interested that the communication factor between an executive and a staff can be so balled up that you will not suspect why you are working yourself to death. It's marvelous. You think I'm kidding. I have found such orders kicking around this ship as the Commodore said that the pedometer had to be left on all the time, which traced back, extracted from a casual remark during a watch on soundings, that is to say, where the pedometer would read where the water was shallow, from, you ought to leave it on. It was taking a fellow 15 or 20 minutes to get this thing tuned in, and we wanted a sounding. And then, well, you ought to leave it on. They omitted the time span. How that? The time span wasn't understood. And so there we had a pedometer. Anyhow, this kind of thing is kind of weird. But you'll be absolutely dismayed how often this occurs, and how this sort of thing is responsible for some of the flubs which you see. The communication is out. It isn't that you haven't said it, but it has been understood in an entirely different context than you thought it was. And this can be so baffling that it absolutely ruins your temper. Now, if you really know your business and know what this is all about, it is true that you sometimes have to blast things through, but if you know what this is all about, you will recognize that communication and relay of information may very well be the factor which is missing and which has caused an upset in some area. And you'll be looking for some culprit, and if HCO is not really on the ball, it'll be willing to hat only when it is hit. And you can get yourself all stirred up about how bad it is and how bad these people are and that sort of thing, when as a matter of fact it is simply a communication breakdown. Now, administrative skill is what I hope to talk to you about a bit before you go back, is just this basis of administrative skill. It's not a subject which I'm willing to write up forever and I. You will see this everywhere in your studies of administrative technology. But it's a special skill, administration. It actually contains the establishment of the communication lines and the flow lines and the information lines and so on, so that you can get team operation. And unless you know that you have to have a communication line on which to relay information, why, the information won't be relayed, and therefore you'll get a team breakdown. And an organization which does not have good administrative guidance can often look very suppressive. There are 2 points in the organization which are of equal rank, and each one of them has an entirely different idea of how something should be done, and nothing is going to flow between those 2 points. Simple thing, like memberships. You just never can mail a membership. And you can curse and damn and swear and issue orders and stamp up and down and say, mail those memberships, and it still doesn't happen. And eventually, there's a sudden surge and a breakdown, and you find out that 5,000 membership cards have just been mailed blank. And you say, what a silly fool. See? And that actually you're fighting with phantoms. These are all phantoms. You had 2 points of equal rank, and they were not in communication, and they didn't have a senior who was enough on the ball to see that the communication line flowed between those 2 points and that those 2 points were in adequate agreement. So that membership is saying that it has to have an invoice before it will make out a membership card, quite rightly. It's always marvelous when you look into these things to find out how right each post was. You'll find out that cashier is saying he has to have an actual file to know who is renewing their memberships and who isn't, and that he cannot take this money and write an invoice on these things unless membership will furnish him with this or that or the other thing. You see, I'm just making one up. Although I ran into one like this, it was actually simpler than this. And they just can't get into agreement with each other on how they make out one, and both of them can be put in such a box as he feels his head will be cut off if he does anything about it at all. Now, this is what is known as a bugged order or a bugged project. Now, if you don't understand that communication has a great deal to do with it, a lot of your projects and orders and actions will get bugged. You have to know how to talk to people, and you have to know how to ask them questions, and sometimes this can be very, very dismaying. In Washington one time, it took me 2 weeks to find out why nobody could go from the registrar to testing. Nobody could go. I mean, that was it. I used to say, do you send people from the registrar to testing? I was getting so into that frame of voice, you see. Do you send people from the registrar's desk to testing? Oh, yes, yes, yes. That's good. Oh, God. Up to testing. Do you receive people up here? Yes, oh yes, registrar, send them up. Do you test? Oh yes, 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 and get the results out instantly. Fine. Why in the name of God won't this line work? Why won't it work? Why won't it work? A few weeks later, when I'd completely given up on it, somebody asked me for a ruling on something. They said it wasn't right to leave this money under the blotter on the registrar's desk in an unlocked office. And I said, what do you mean it isn't right? You'll only be there for a few minutes. Oh, no. It's off in here for a couple of weeks. And at that moment, the penny dropped. They only tested on Monday. So if somebody came into the org on Monday afternoon, they could not be processed until the following Monday. Pardon me, couldn't be tested till the following Monday, even if an auditor was available. The miscommunication was to testing, and that is they were supposed to have just a little 2-minute test. Actually, a meter check sort of thing. That was all they were supposed to do. And that had never been communicated to the testing post. So they just tested everybody on Monday morning. And naturally, it didn't matter how many PCs came up from the registrar. They still had to wait till Monday morning. So somebody had dropped the time factor out, and it made a psychotic situation. But there's a miscommunication. Guy didn't know what his job was. guy in testing didn't have a hat that was complete. Now, he was doing what he thought was right. And believe me, it was costing the org a fortune, and it was breaking tempers and ARC breaking feces all over the place, and we just couldn't find where this line is. All right, so communication. You can talk all you want to about administrative, about technical know-how on admin. Communication is still part of it. Is the hat complete? Is it real? You have to realize that somebody isn't just defying you if something isn't happening, that it's bugged. And you have to be able to understand that it may be the communication which is bugged. And you have to clear this up. Or you have to have somebody in personal enhancement who can clear it up. This post isn't running right. What doesn't the guy understand about it? What is the condition of this post? Other things of this character. Now, you're actually working with a communicating entity. And that communicating entity makes a team. And if it isn't communicating, and if you are not communicating to it, and it isn't getting the data, why, it won't operate as a team. Simple as that. It isn't how good their morale is. It's just that they're not in communication with one another. So you see a recent innovation of such a thing as a Flag Bureau data letter. It has no command value particularly. It is sent around for information, but it can give you the program of an area. It can give you the evaluation. It can give you what's happening in Keokuk, and why Joe Blow was removed and why somebody else was appointed. It's just an information bit. Now you say, well, you can clutter the place up with information bits to such a degree that nobody will read them because you've got a jammed communication line. That isn't necessarily true. An informed group will operate as a team. A group which has communication lines will operate as a team. And your agreement between posts is essential. And these are some of the skills of an administrator. How does he get those lines flowing? How does he get these guys into communication? Now you see this great wide world out here of super-industrialism, and you say, well, how is it operating? I'll let you in on something. It isn't. Money is inflating. Now, what is back of money inflation? Partially political. But the other part of it is those cats produce those ornate fronts and those beautiful swank offices and those hot and cold running vice presidents at such enormous expense in comparison to their production that they are not viable. And you're looking at a whole civilization that isn't viable. Look at what your dollar bought last year. Look at what it buys this year. It's going right up in smoke. Well, that is because production is not being done efficiently. That would be the first thing that you would say about it. Actually it's so gross that it's being politically interfered with, and every other thing that you could think of is in the road of a proper smooth running activity. And the world is actually carried on the backs of a few desperate men. And a poorly administered area is carried on the backs of its poor, desperate executives. Now, if you really know your business, you can debug it, get it to flow, get it to expand. If you really know your business, you will get absolutely fantastic amounts of cooperation from your staff. It is very, very interesting. I have seen somebody who knew a division whose personality, you'd say, was quite poor, whose this was bad, and whose that was bad, and whose charm, and whose this and that wasn't all that good. And I've seen him take over division from somebody who was an absolute charmer, a hail fellow well met, and so on, and seen the whole division brighten up, become very enthusiastic and on the ball, and production go up through the roof. The difference was know-how. The guy who knows is respected. And the guy who doesn't know can use all the PR in the world and he'll still fall on his face. So, with that, I've given you as much as you can assimilate at this particular moment with the whole course staring some of you in the teeth. you'll find out that you have some new study technology which is being handed to you. Some of you are really going to be put over the jumps on this subject, not because you were a bad student, not because you don't know your business, but so that we can speed up the ability with which you can assimilate information. And the ability to assimilate information is one of the finest skills an executive has. Now, the enemy is just about ready to give up the ghost. He has given up several ghosts lately, very spectacularly, risen in the air. Enemy press and that sort of thing is getting desperate, and so on. We're getting ready for the big push. So we think it is time we grooved in the heads of organization and its principal executives so that they can put an organization there that will really run. And we think it is time that we prepared for the kickoff, because that kickoff time is now. Thank you. How are you? Well, some of you are alive. Now, what happens here, this is the 18th of January, 8021. What happens here, very often, used to happen at St. Hill occasionally, is the developmental line would exceed the write-up line. And that essentially is what has happened here, and I found it best to give you a very rapid rundown of the one of the several developments which have been made in the field of administration. The area of administration is comparable to auditing on the third dynamic, and where an auditor has one PC, an administrator has a whole bunch of them. And he audits on standard procedures, and he audits at a very rapid rate. Now, if you can perceive administration in this light as having a great many procedures, but all of them very standard, you all of a sudden get a new look. In the field of PR, for instance, the main trouble is that no one uses standard PR. It's practically no one. There is a textbook on the subject. One of the reasons why the textbook is not completely applied is the discipline is poor in this field, because the subject itself didn't have any great use. Well, we'll touch on that this evening, but I just wanted to give it to you as an example. So that here is a field, there are certain standard procedures. Now, hardly anybody but a Scientologist would know what you were talking about if you said standard procedures. They go, oh, yeah, well, yeah, I get it. Your textbook, yeah, you read that in school, and you go on, you do something, you know, that textbook hasn't anything to do with it. That's the truth. And one of the difficulties the world is in right this minute is they've thrown away the textbook of economics. And there's a couple of Hungarians, not that there's anything wrong with Hungarians, but it's a great oddity that a couple of Hungarians have been for the last decade or two wandering around from government to government, being employed by prime ministers, and they give him a whole bunch of squirrel economic technology, and the country goes broke. It's quite a system. I'm not joking, actually. This has been going on. The last place they stopped was England. A little earlier than that, there was a fellow named Lord Keynes. And Lord Keynes, he had some he was part of the Oxford movement, I think, and he was part of the Fabian group, and they had peculiar sexual ideas and so forth. They were very strange people. And Lord Keynes took the textbook on economics and wrote it backwards or upside down, crossed it with the manufacture of firecrackers and the burial of dead rats, and began to teach this very broadly, so that in the early 30s we began to find Keynesian economics being practiced very hard and fast and furiously, and by the professors only at Harvard. And from Harvard, it swung out into the remaining American universities and went out into other universities in the world. A completely untried ivory tower professorial approach to the field of economics, the central theme of which is create want. So that if you create want, economics all solves itself. Only he forgets that he is simply squirreling on the law of supply and demand. Doesn't state that, forgets anything having anything to do with inflation and deflation. And now we, as a group, actually are confronted by an escalating inflation. And this inflation subject is a very nasty subject to have much to do with. Inflation is predicted through the 70s at the rate of about 8% per annum for the U.S. dollar. Well, that's just another method of placating the public, because it's been escalating, rising much more rapidly than that in the last few years. Trouble with inflation, if anybody looked at the basic textbook on the subject, is it goes in an upward swinging curve, and the curve gets steeper and steeper and steeper until it gets vertical. And at that point, that's it. You bury your money. Now, it's happened with several countries recently. And these countries have bitten the dust. And they have not been the same country afterwards. They were in different hands. So if the primary financial income of our movement is from the United States, and somebody is tampering with the United States dollar on the basis of a squirrel textbook, people have suddenly woke up to it. I mean, it took them long enough, 1930 forward, you know. People suddenly woke up to the fact that they're dealing with squirrel economics. There's beginning to be a fairly good hue and cry on the subject. Actually, they've traced it back to Harvard, and it's sort of, there's a book just been released on the subject exposing it all. Actually, I collided with it a few years ago and wondered where all this came from. Found the rest of the world didn't know where it all came from. And did some tracking down on it myself. Somebody who was a suppressive decided to ruin a lot of economics, and they've succeeded in doing so. This gives us a problem. Now, how does this come in to what I'm going to talk to you about tonight? Well, it comes into this as I'm presenting you. There's an actual problem. Money will be worth less and less, but probably under the weird duresses of the thing, there will be less of it. Worth less and less and be less of it. Now, therefore, a movement which is expanding requires certain things. It is expanding into, we are actually expanding into a world which is, to be, make an understatement of the age, a bit mad. And we have to exist within the economic framework of the society. If we don't exist in the economic framework of the society, we'll have had it. For instance, it might amaze you, but that SMERSH, the World Federation of Mental Health, National Association of Mental Health Network, is having an awful time. We decided some time ago to cut off their supply, and we are doing so. They, nevertheless, have all the government appropriation there is in the field of mental health. they are dependent only on the bayonets of the government, really, and to the degree that they're supported by governments. That makes a very weak movement. Makes a very weak movement. The wheel turns, the political wheel turns, the political fashions fade, because they're not delivering anything, which brings us closer to our subject tonight. Their product is death. Now, anybody can produce that without going to a university for 12 years. I can see a Matthew Hood right now requiring a certificate that he has studied for 12 years. Now, this is not into an unsavory lines. They are badly organized. They appear to be fairly well organized, but they're not. They're badly organized. They're badly financed. A group such as our own, going into a world which is not too orderly, succeeds to the degree that it is efficient, that it has workable, useful technology, and to the degree that it stays alert and handles the situations as they arise. Those three conditions are necessary to a forward movement and an expansion. So it has been my basic work here in 1970 to bring forward enough administrative information and enough administrative technology to bring the field of administration into a par with auditing, which, as you know, is terribly precise. Now, that has been accomplished in the theoretical and in the practical aspects both. Now, therefore, the FEBC and the material which is being taught at this time leads up to these breakthroughs in the field of administration. You're not dealing now with somebody's idea of how the thing should be. You're dealing with some natural, basic laws. It isn't because I have an idea that if you say, do you have an ARC break, ARCU, CDEI, certainly or similar ARCU, CDEI, FN, it isn't because I say this works, or that this is true, or that the mind should operate this way. That is not that. It is a basic discovery. It incorporates many parts, but these things assembled come into flying a root. Now, there is theory merging into practical application with which you are all familiar. Now, this can be gorgeously abused. This is for a PC who has an emotional upset. So if a PC is sitting there with a high TA, we say, do you have an ARC break? Misuse of a tool. So the auditor struggles around and nothing much happens, and sometimes he actually makes it and gets the TA down by some other means which is disguised inside this subject. But the truth of the matter is, after he's done this with this PC a few times and so on, you'll find the PC is now ARC broken about ARC breaks. The technology is sufficiently good to obtain a recovery from that, too. But this is a standard technology. Now, what is this? Basically, the situation is that there is a situation. That is the first thing one has to be able to recognize, that there is a situation. Now, to know there's a situation, one must have a familiarity with an ideal scene and with the existing scene. And he finds the existing scene is different from the ideal scene. So he knows he has a situation. Now, the situation can be analyzed by taking the data related to the situation and narrowing it down, and then we find what caused the situation, which we call a why. And having found that, we can remedy it, and the PC recovers from the ARC break. Well, you thought I was talking about administration, didn't you? Now, if you put these two things, then, a frame of reference, you find out that we now have in our hands a superior administrative technology, still in a developmental stage, as all progressive or dynamic technologies are. Progressive and dynamic technologies actually do not cease to develop. They continuously refine. That staggers somebody if he doesn't realize that what is being refined is the progress being made by the basic law, not the change of the basic law. I think the law of gravity keeps changing because somebody eventually develops a method to make anti-gravity, don't you think? The law of gravity has not changed. When you have isolated the basic laws, you get a continuous refinement. Some people are idiotic enough to call mixing a bunch of chemicals in a test tube and getting soup instead of dupe basic discovery. No, it isn't. What it is simply development from basic discoveries which are made. There probably has not been a basic discovery made on the planet for the last 25 years, except perhaps in our field. This is pretty interesting. All we get is a developmental progress whereby people refine what they already knew. There were several basic discoveries made in the early part of the century, and the last of them probably was how you tickle the tiger's tail and got plutonium to cease to exist at rapidity, and then how you manage to make hydrogen dehydrogize at vast violence. Those took some basic and original discoveries, which were not new at the time, but the developmental line exposed them into a practical application. So anyway, there hasn't been any basic discoveries to amount to anything. Nearly all these discoveries which you see around, they're not all these developments which you see around the faster automobile and so on, is simply the refinement of something. So you can continue to expect refinement from the basic discoveries which have been put together here in the last year, and actually within the last 25 years in this field, because it's been under investigation. Now, these laws which we're working with now are not resident in just last year's work. You will find them spattered all through the OEC course, these fundamentals. Now, as these fundamentals are put together, you approach something that appears to be a standard procedure. A standard procedure is subject to refinement just as you get a further workability. In the field of public relations itself, we have just started the subject. The subject actually did not exist except in somebody's imagination as an applicable technology, because they didn't apply it the way they should have applied it, and they didn't know what it was for, and they didn't know its basic laws. It's very amusing, but public relations just began. Every professor that teaches public relations would contest this madly. Well, it began back in 1911. I would say, Professor, will you please research your subject? It began in Rome with political campaigns painted on the outside of the Colosseum. I don't happen to be kidding right now. But as far as our written technology technology of public relations is concerned, it goes back, way back. And as far as the written technology is concerned, it belongs in Rome. And it started out there as a formal subject to get senators elected. But there's been very dim tumblings all the way along the line. Now, what would you do if you suddenly took this subject? If you took this subject in so many words, and all of a sudden it had a precise, exact role which you couldn't get along without. What would happen? All of a sudden it wouldn't be something that they hired 6 guys in this $100 million firm to exploit and to monkey with, and they sit in the back room and figure out how they can do this or that with this or that. If any of these guys use their standard technology, they'd probably run well. But it's very difficult to get these fellows to use the standard technology because they really don't know their own textbook too well. There is a textbook, see, but it's some technologies. Now, what are they for? As a result, they have let an entirely different part of the university walk off with about 50% of their subject. I can tell you what public relations is for. What is this subject for? Public relations is for the handling and control of human emotion and reaction. Now, we got a subject now. Yeah, but look, they gave 50% of this away to the psychologists who fumbled it all off and applied it to rats. Now, there's something that we get drift. So they split their subject. It's a third dynamic technology. The psychologists moved it all over onto another dynamic. We tried to get it over onto the first dynamic and this, that, and the other thing. So what is the central subject itself? The handling and control of human emotion and reaction. Good. Well, now you have to do quite a bit with this subject. Immediately, you have to do quite a bit with this subject. We're away now. Oh, this is what this stuff is for. Good. All right. Now, what parts of what do you have to use in order to do this? Well, according to the public relations technologies, you've got one that runs something like this. You do a survey, and on the basis of this survey, you put together a program, and you use your various communication media, word of mouth, newspaper, magazines, loudspeakers. And with this various communication media, based on this program, you alter human emotion and reaction. Actually, it's such a failure, the way it has been done, that in the public relations textbooks, they say, people who say they're molding public opinion, of course, are just silly. Newspapers think they mold public opinion. In other words, they're laughing at their own subject. In that little line, it says, this subject has failed. Let's go back to science or survival and see how this thing works. We do a survey. We put the exact arithmetical number on each question of this survey in its response. All right, let's ask this question. Do you like dogs? And the fellow says, I hate dogs. We put .5. You got it? Science or survival? Put it down arithmetically. You add up that question in its arithmetical values, the number of people it was asked. You can do it as crudely as then divided by the number of people. You find exactly what tone scale point you were working with. To control a tone scale point, you move, old law, you move half a tone to a tone above it. Your campaign must then be half a tone to a tone above it. Instantly and immediately you have a successful campaign which molds public opinion, which controls human emotion and reaction. So there we are. Yeah, but how do you get this question? I mean, the question, that's very simple. There's nothing much to this question. Three questions. One is the equivalent of be, one is equivalent to do, one is the equivalent of have. Very good. Be, do, have, three questions. Above and below it, why, you could have a couple of null questions. You're trying to find out if somebody on the assembly line likes automobiles. He's building them. Does he like them? Well, that's an easy one because it's already a human emotion. Do you like automobiles? Let's find out if he's going to work on the assembly line. Make it a little bit tougher. Now we're going to find out, are you going to work on the assembly line? All right, we go around and ask public relations. Say, you going to work on the assembly line? The guy says no, the next guy says yes, and so forth. You're no place. So therefore, you take the questions you want to know on the subject of be, do, have, and you encode them into human emotion using the ARC triangle. We don't care whether you put A or R or C after each question. You're going to translate the basic question that you know into human emotion in order to obtain involvement. And you immediately have involvement. So you get the true answer, don't you? But the target of your subject is, of course, the control of human emotion and reaction. So if that is the case, then you would have to have involvement in human emotion and reaction. So how do you put this question together? Let's go right back to battery now. This subject is the control of human emotion and reaction. So therefore, the questions of your survey have to be what you want to know, transported over into a human emotion and reaction. B, do automobiles exist? Translated once across for an A is, do you like automobiles? You will get then an emotional response which can be plotted. Now, why all this? Now, you see, I'm teaching you this backwards. I'm moving back. Now the penny drops. The primary barrier to production is human emotion and reaction. It's the primary barrier to production. And all at once, we know where PR lives. There's its use. Not in getting somebody to become a man of extinction by drinking Seagram's whiskey, to aid and assist advertising, which would be a minor use, but actually to sound out the public to which the campaign is addressed so as to handle the human emotion reaction. All right, now I'll trace it back through the basic laws that we're involved with then. Is the primary barrier to production is human emotion and reaction. Public relations is the technology of handling and controlling human emotions and reaction. So you have to find out what is the human emotion and reaction, so you get an encoding of the question. 3 questions, 1 be, 1 do, 1 have. You translate those over into an emotional question by adding the ARC triangle. You plot that. Now you get your human emotions in response to these questions. You add them up. You put your program together against the tone scale 1/2 to 1 band above. You will have a pretty uniformly successful method of reach. Now, are you willing to argue with me that I all of a sudden tell you that PR has suddenly become of age? So the subject has been around since Rome, and it does have its own technologies. But the most ignorant people of its technologies are some of the PR guys with whom I've worked. I've been trained in this field, and the oral tradition of the field does not contain a great many of the textbook solutions. The textbook technology is missing to a very marked degree in much of what you call the oral tradition when you're taught verbally by these fellows. They know what to do, kind of, but they find themselves often adrift. Went back recently and read the textbooks of this subject on its developmental line, mostly accumulations of experiential application. And I was struck by the fact that very few people use, in this field of PR, very few people in this field actually use standard approaches. They're a little bit squirrely, but there is a standard approach. So, now, why don't they use a standard approach? Well, the subject wasn't oriented. What is this subject for? So the dumb fools go and hire a psychologist. They're the birds who control human emotion and reaction. So they hire a psychologist. I think this is marvelous. Right in their own technologies. Now these were then insufficiently exact as procedures to impress the practitioner. They were insufficiently exact, insufficiently precise. So he thought he had some judgment involved. But if you know Dianetics and Scientology, and you move into this field, you will all of a sudden find that they mourn the absence of a science of the mind in their own field. Like, how can you do anything with this subject unless you have a science of the mind? That remark is made in their textbooks, you see. Types of remarks like this. They mourn their lack of success, and actually they don't even know our communication formula. Now, our communication formula is vitally necessary to the practice of this field. Vitally necessary. It's as simple as cause, distance, effect. If you take just the shorthanded formula, cause, distance, effect. They're public relations, they're communication media. They think of themselves as communication technology. They do not have that. So cause, distance, effect. They don't have it streamlined down like that. So when they say, when you make a survey, they actually have missed, if you go into some of the textbooks, they've actually missed certain points that were vital. There's an FO right now which gives you the proper cycle, and it does not agree with the textbook cycle because the textbook cycle has simply left out a couple of steps that would have made somebody fail. I needn't go into it any further than that. There's the reason why one was turned out, which was a public relations form for submission for an okay. And it follows a definite cycle of action, which is based on, actually, the communication formula and so forth. It's highly precise. And that was because they didn't have the communication formula, so they couldn't write it up in their textbook as to what you did exactly. So they missed out a couple of points. And then those 2 points of action would bring about failure. One of the reasons why managers sometimes throw them out the front door and won't have a public relations firm anywhere around is they very often popularize a flap. They don't pre-survey. Somebody just gets killed in the plant. Newspaper reporter calls up, "What's this I hear about somebody being killed in the plant, bud?" You know, in good English like they use. And the public relations man gets on the phone and he says, "No comment." See, or he says this, or he says that, or he says something else. And he mishandles this. And then he assumes that there is a situation, that the people in the town are going to be very alarmed because somebody has been killed in the plant by poisonous gases or something. So public relations at once gets out a campaign saying how these poisonous gases are not very poisonous. He didn't bother to survey. Was there a situation? You see what point was missing? So public relations very often is involved in handling situations which don't exist. And they very often find themselves involved in bringing about situations which didn't exist. Let's take a fellow who isn't good textbook in the field of public relations now. He glanced at the textbook on his way through class one day by accident. Now he goes out and he's worked alongside of some guys who are old-timers and they know best. And frequent change of auditors is one of the reasons why the firms they go to work for fail, by the way. It's actually just that. The company account, your company's account, is handed through so many account executives, and the turnover of account executives is so rapid that the service being rendered from that account is poor. And this is traced as a primary reason why you shouldn't use an independent outside public relations firm. Frequent change of auditors. Goes back almost to an auditor's code, don't you think? So this guy, he fumbles around and he gets himself some kind of he's got a job, he's sort of trained experientially in practical aspects of it. Maybe gets up as far as TR0, see? But practical aspects of it he puts into practice. And these various practical aspects are some little rules that have sort of been made up, and he manages to go through. Whereas, as a matter of fact, there was a procedure in the textbook, if he had studied it, which probably would have brought the situation on. So he goes off half-cocked on some kind of a campaign, on somebody's hunch. I'm just sure that these characters will like these Wheaties with green tops instead of red tops. Get over in the field of market research. I'm just sure of that. All right, now we're going to have you tear off your mother-in-law's head and send it in, and we will send you a box top or something. And he lays a god-awful egg with this campaign. The company puts out $123,794.62, and they don't get any mother-in-law's heads at all. And then somebody goes back and he says, "Say, what do you know?" He said, "We did, you know, you get a tip someplace or another. You know, you should have asked people first. You know, yeah, I guess I should have asked people first. Actually, they might not even get as close as a formal survey, but they might get this close. Well, all right, we'll call up the Gallup Company, and after this, when we talk about mother-in-law's heads, we will get a survey made out in the public as to whether you like this sort of thing or don't like that sort of thing. And that costs another $225,000, and they get a whole Gallup poll or survey done, and guys go around in the streets and shove microphones at people and knock on doors, and they get all written down and send letters to selected publics, and no, they're expensive. Anyhow, then I find out this survey, when it was all put together, seemed to be very reliable, but now they said to tear off the bottom of the box, which is now purple, and that the company would send the family their mother-in-law's head, see? And then this campaign doesn't work either. And somebody then gets a vast research project together, and they finally find out that people on surveys don't tell the truth. And now they've got the bugaboo. The bugaboo of a survey is that people say what they think somebody wants to hear. And they say, oh yes, I love Wheaties, whereas as a matter of fact, they smoke Luckies, you see. And they find out that the lie factor is so great that they have to put a lie question into the survey in order to go on. Well, I'm clowning up a series of examples here, but I think you comprehend some of these examples. And this is what it finally amounts to. This is what it finally amounts to. That they didn't know what their subject was for exactly. Didn't know what their subject was for, so it is sort of being oddly used, and it's sort of off its own standards because it isn't oriented. So if they had the definition, there was human emotion and reaction, they wouldn't go around with questions that didn't elicit an emotional response in the first place. They would have to know a great many refinements. Now, I'm not ignorant on this subject. I was actually trained by Midwest Rogers one time when I innocently walked in with my wide blue eyes open, pulled in as a writer to the California Centennial, 1849, 1949. And they had to get a hold of a writer, and they had to have somebody who could write up the little history books and so forth that they needed. And so I said, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I've been up in Mother kind of know all about that, and I can look it up, and you've got a lot of books, and we put them together, and we give you your little manuals and so forth. It's all fine, all right, boys? And so on. And they said, no. And I said, what's the matter? I said, well, we have a rule in the Midwest Rogers that anybody who was working anywhere in, around, Centennials or things, see, they're the outfit. Wild name, Midwest Rogers. Doesn't say anything, what do you think? They want to remain anonymous, I think. But they put on all of these big centennials, like the Sesquicentennial of Texas and all of that sort of thing, the big boom shows, you see. And they say, you've got to study the technology and so forth of how we work before you can work with us, which is great. American firms have this down pretty pat. 2 advertising agencies or an account executive in the advertising agency and his staff talking to the company advertising contact man put on about the wildest show you ever wanted to see. Well, one of them is educating the other one into what we do, and then the other one will turn around and educate them into what we do, and they get a feel that they're good at this sort of thing. They've got a lot of these little gimmicks. They do have technology. They don't quite know where it fits a lot of times. So here they say to me, well, yeah, well, you think you're just a writer, and you've got to study what we do. So you come to school, and the next thing you know, I'm sitting there listening all about and doing the play demos on exactly how you throw together a centennial. Now, don't think there isn't technology in this field, because a Midwest Rogers man walks in with his little grip, and he's got a few little things in there. He's got some tickets, and he's got some other little things. With very little money in his pocket, And he walks into this town, and a few months later, they have a centennial. It's absolute creative magic, if you ever saw one. This is promotional par excellence. He organizes the various contests. He gets the businessmen, the local chamber of commerce. It all goes off almost by checklist. You do this, you do that, you do the other thing, and then you do something or other, and then et cetera. And then when you've got that, the beauty queen contest and so on, and then the tickets are sold in the stores, and that's the votes for the beauty queen. And you do and the Midwest Rogers man, he gets the hats and whips. Yeah, what's this? Actually, I wouldn't be able to tell you too much of the technology because it's all super technological. We could be criticized on the same ground. They've got their special names for everything. Hats and whips, that's the souvenir business. So the guy who organizes the whole thing, why, the Midwest Rogers man, he refers to himself the hats and whips concession. So he sells out this hats and whips concession, and that's how he gets a side payoff from all of this. And they wind up with the doggonedest, biggest, wildest centennial anybody ever heard of. So when I finished with the course, and got all set with that, and took my examination, and et cetera, getting all ready to sit down to my typewriter and write about the dear old days of '49, when Black Bart was preventing the digging of gold. Why, they said, say, how would you like Sacramento? And I said, what? What are you talking about? Well, they said, you're one of the best agents we got here. And so on, you got the highest grades, and wouldn't you like to go up to Sacramento and take charge of that sector? I said, no, I'll sit here and write your stories. Thank you very much. But they do have technology. There's lots of technology in the field. Now, that's public relations technology applied to promotion. You would apply that type of technology to a Congress or something of this sort. Then there's the other old daily grind technology. Well, what are you trying to do with all of this? What are you trying to do with all of this? You're either trying to create or generate, handle, control, and so forth, human emotion and reaction. The whole field of public relations, no matter how many little compartments it got, is actually occupying that zone and area. And that is the subject, if you've got to have one, called psychology. That's what the psychologist should be able to do. That's what a general is always trying to grab hold of his psychological warfare staff and say, bring the enemy to their knees so we don't have to expend all this ammunition. We don't mind expending troops, but firing these guns is expensive, you know. He's always asking psychological warfare. Well, actually, it's just simply a job in PR. Enemy, job in PR. Friends, job in PR. Just different publics. We right now could take a survey of the enemy. We know them, name, rank, serial number, where they live, why their grandmother had to marry the girl. We know all about them. All we'd have to do is take a survey of them on human emotion terms. Plot it up on the tone scale. Launch a campaign to them, mold their opinion. Now, you're mainly dealing in a world where the war for men's minds is rampant. Russia is fighting a war for the minds of men. And America, and every company in America, and the British Information Service are all fighting a war to capture the minds of men. To do this, they use PR technology. We don't care whether it's called propaganda. We have here our northern neighbors, published in Canada, December 1970, number 159. It is written in Moscow. It is published in Canada. It's a fantastic tour de force. There are several copies of it. Different months. July, August, September, October, November, December. Here's Popov, the clown, and his goat. They're world famous. They'll be delighting lucky Soviet kids this holiday season. For a personal look at the sunny clown and the Soviet circus, see pages 14 and 15. We open it up. Contents. Big mystery of human growth. The best year yet for us. Sex. 73,000 Dr. Spocks. Very intriguing. The cover page, when they speak about sex, how they're ending farm pollution. Will you go short of power and heat, you people in Canada? Well, we've got lots of it in Russia. USSR has 9 big problems. This is amazing. It's an amazing tour de force. Fantastic. They have a technique of counterpoint. Everything that is publicized in the American press is counterpointed in these magazines that is good in Russia. You have juvenile delinquency in the United States, we don't have it. In the United States, you have to have women's freedoms movements, and in Russia, we've had them for years. We're absurdly free in Russia. Like they're the only ones that work. Here is the champion champion weightlifter. Just before the world heavyweight lifting champion, Jan Toltz, left USSR for USA to take part in the tournament at Columbus, Ohio, the International Federation bosses stripped him of his title and record and handed the title over to Robert Bednarski of USA. Here's what Toltz did to those cheats. We find out that all the other competitors were on speed. They were on amphetamines. But nobody knew that. And nobody listened. And so forth. And he really did win. After all. Even when he lost. Are Roman Catholics turning to the left? This PR. Fantastic. I isolated 3 systems in use in this. Mary Sue did analysis on it. And I isolated 3 systems of propaganda which they use. Very effective. 3 isolated technical systems. I gave you one of them. Won't bother the other 2. You got dirty streets? Russia, they're all clean streets. You having troubles? If you was in Russia, you wouldn't have these troubles. Western youth, they have acne. Russian youth, no acne. Soviet doctors have cured it all. They found out what it is, yes. You get it? Counterpoint, 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 counterpoint. Effective. But somewhat defiant. So therefore it's not very smooth. But this is dialectic materialism at use, which is their mental technology. All ideas result from the collision of 2 forces. They say it differently. Then they implant thetans, they use a positive negative. Now, just as we're sitting here with the undercut of dialectic materialism, we're sitting here with an undercut of propaganda. Now, if you use the existing standard technologies of public relations, and if you use the standard existing means and media, and if you gave them just that little bit of refinement necessary of an orientation of the subject and what is the subject for, and you do it right straight down the groove, and then the people who use it know what they're doing. That is the important point. You have an impingement on the society. we're being treated to a counter-propaganda campaign the like of which nobody ever heard of. Now, somehow or another, we've got to move up to the front with this, and we don't have the news media under our control and so on. We're being treated to a counter-propaganda campaign and have for a long time. This isn't the press talking. This is the people who make the press talking. We have had innumerable wins. They're never reported. The enemy never does have any wins. They have hope. Did you ever analyze all of their news articles and so on? Hope. But they have a news office located up someplace in England and so on, which is a handout PR office, and it just sends off all these things you read about psychology is new hope for the, mentally retarded will no longer be if certain things succeed. Hope. And we find out that by our survey of the British departments and ministries that they think the public is terribly, well, actually had them surveyed to find out what they thought was bad propaganda so I could get it to them. And they answered up, and we've got it all written down in the bag. If I ever wanted to machine gun them, why, there it is. Because their PR men would go mad, and they just listen to what the PR man says inside the lineup. What is public opinion? Public opinion, what is written in the newspapers and what your PR man says. That's as near as a politician ever comes to it. A government is peculiarly susceptible to clipping newspapers. Now let's go back here to this Soviet deal. The Soviet published magazine, perfectly legal. They have some agreement with Canada and so on. The Soviet published magazine is given a fantastic job of doing what most embassies and so forth do in the field of overt intelligence, they call it, which is clipping magazines and newspapers. They have to do all this covert. To find out what is being said in the American press and in American technical journals and that sort of thing, it's necessary for the Russians to use their satellite states and to actually smuggle the stuff and so on. They have just to get what the New York Times says, it has to go back in a diplomatic mail pouch to Moscow for this stuff to be written. So they do a splendid job, really. There isn't anybody in Canada writing this. Russia export an editor that's permitted to write something in Canada? Oh, no. So, all the material that goes into this is taken from intelligence sources. They have a fantastic network, then, just to collect this material. And then this material has to go to Moscow, and it has to be edited and put together, and the stuff written. Now, then it has to be turned around and exported, and all this rapidly enough for it to be timely, in order to hit the presses of northern neighbors published in Canada. Now we're really getting down to pay dirt. PR requires organization. And it requires pretty hot organization. If you ever wanted to see an organization have to function, it's a PR organization. You really have to know administration, left, right, and center to do PR. There are very few PR men who were ever trained in administration. Yet it's essentially an administrative subject. It is the failure to keep their clipping book up to date that causes many a PR man to fail. Who organizes all of the stuff that brings this stuff in from covertly to diplomatic pouches to Russia, to get it spilled out, to get it digested, clipped? Who keeps the office running there? Who supplies it with enough personnel that can speak the language and write in it? Who organizes the route back into northern neighbors and takes care of the PR to keep Canada happy, to having it published? This is quite an organizational tour de force. So that propaganda of any kind requires organization. That is why, by the way, we knew extremely well, we knew very well that the enemy that we were confronted with was not a few random newspaper reporters, but was extremely well organized because the timing on it and so on. And I made some interesting discoveries on this because searching for it in the field of organization, I can tell you now just about exactly what kind of an organization they have and about where it sits and about what it does and so forth, just by knowing their organization requirements. And they stink. They stink. They couldn't run a kitty cut. It was just failing to find them and failing to estimate what they were doing and why is what kept us being hit by the thing. And also they were there first, and they had all what they call the mass media under total control and under their thumb. So, of course, they could say anything they pleased, and we were not in a position to say anything we pleased. So how do we reverse all of this? Well, now, there's one little sector of technology, and I've been going along this sector of technology, just showing you that you can make a breakthrough in a particular field and give you some sort of an idea of it. Now, PR comes into its own in the field of production. And the reason I'm talking to you about PR is the primary barrier to production is human emotion and reaction. And as you move forward, you will find you're in collision with human emotion and reaction almost consistently and continuously. If you don't understand some of this that I've been telling you about PR, you will have an awful time of it. If you think PR is going around and being a nice fellow, or talking somebody around in some fashion or another, why, you might as well forget it, because PR is not being a pleasant fellow. ARC is only one little portion of PR. PR is a technological activity. Now, it always has had technological procedures, so we've moved it up onto the front burner. Now, I'm not trying to sell you anything here with PR at all. I'm trying to give you an example of a technical breakthrough. Now, from the basic little laws which I gave you on the subject of PR, definition and scope of subject, you can now develop technical applications, and you can develop practices which are based on these basic actions and laws and formulas, and which utilize anything known about the subject to date, and it puts you in control of human emotion and reaction in your immediate vicinity. So, there is a piece of technology, and as a piece of technology, it has considerable value. But it gives you where you go when you make a basic breakthrough. We happen to be in the field of human emotion and reaction, and therefore we're in continuous collision with this particular field. Being in continuous collision with this field, we better know something about handling it. And therefore, one of the adjuncts that a production officer would have to have would be a PR arm of some type or kind. So, if he moved it up into the upper story and he was really working at volume, he would actually have to be supported by a PR man. If he weren't supported by a PR man, he would come a cropper. unless you know something about this, unless you know that a subject exists. I'm not talking to you to suddenly know this whole subject, but you've got to know that such a subject exists, that it does have technology, and that it has found its basic and primary use, which is an adjunct of production. And if you know those facts, your interest in it would be adequate, that when you start running into the problem of human emotion and reaction as a barrier, you would know that there is a technology that can move ahead with this and handle the human emotion and reaction you're running into as a barrier to your production. We have a whole world right now to handle. It will eventually go out something along the line of a forward action ahead of where we are. There will always be a sort of a PR outpost or a small PR action going on in advance of where we are working. Now, the enemy has been trying very, very hard with very knuckle-headed PR, which overran itself and began to overrun itself and got mixed up along about the time of the Melbourne inquiry. And ever since that time, the enemy has been making the continuous mistake of hitting it too hard. About that time, he went too far, and you find out there's been a press revulsion. But long before that, there was a press revulsion. Actually was a public revulsion. So the enemy, in following through various formulas of what he thought it should all consist of, and following them through very badly, has done a very bad job of it. He has made our name known. The recent, quote, lost suit in England was worth easily £100,000 in advertising. Easily. We couldn't have bought it. It demonstrated that the government had no case against it, and it demonstrated that a member of Parliament can say what he pleases. These are disrelated facts. Didn't have much to do with that. But that we would attack the government apparently made us very popular. The formula of revolution is as follows. The person who is antagonistic toward the government joins anyone who opposes it. They ask no questions about who they're joining. They only know that they want to blow down eventually or change or alter a government. Anybody who attacks the government then that's how revolution begins, and that's why revolutions are usually betrayed. The people who join revolutions are usually betrayed because they never ask the question of who am I joining. They just join whoever's again it. That outfit's again it? Good. Must be a good outfit. Join it up. That formula just went on in England. The psychotic up there, Minister Crossman, he's a real spinner. He's quite mad. And that's not just a casual insult. He runs the New Statesman. He thinks the Scientologists are some sort of a revolutionary group that are not as bad as the Yippies or something. And you read this over, why, you know you're reading a guy who thinks the Martians are after him. So he wouldn't be able to differentiate who we are or what. But he has already decided that we're against the government. As a matter of fact, it isn't even true. But that we lost in suing the government was not the point. That we were against the government was the point. You seldom get a chance to make a statement, we're against the government. Now, people who are looking for a raw red revolution, of course, would liable to be disappointed when they came to us because people are misreading the whole situation. Left and right misreading the situation. We have a PR situation, first and foremost. We have a PR situation. Therefore, this is part of the technology with which we're operating. This technology should be known to you. that there is a method of proceeding into the public. There is a method of handling and controlling human opinion. If you don't understand that, then your own hopes of expansion would be greatly curtailed. Administration and organization is very complex, but there is a method of extending your own basis of operation into the government, into the people, into the this, and even into the enemy. And that you should know that that is that. And come off a rather silly approach of just trying to be good, and eventually they will recognize your worth. It doesn't work at all. It has no value. In the field of PR, good works well publicized is one of the definitions which they gave in a textbook on the subject. That's supposed to be the perfect definition of PR. It couldn't be further from the truth. Effective cause, well demonstrated. You see, they need a few little refinements. Then you can make forward progress. Now, all the organization you do in the world is not going to do you any good unless you're making forward progress into the environment in which you find yourself. An organization must only expand. An organization which contracts dies. That happens to be the way the universe is built. It isn't because I say so, it's because it's true. And so therefore, you must look considerably to your various PR factors as you move on out. And these should not be neglected. Now, in the shininess and brassiness and newness of the technology with which you are now dealing, and the administrative technology with which you're now dealing, we haven't yet begun to fight along this particular line. I mean, we're really with it. Why, if you don't know that there is a method of handling human emotion and reaction, and you don't know that that is the method by which you will extend, and you don't know that fancy mailing you're getting out and paying a lot of money for, it wasn't based on any survey, had no project back of it, had no campaign at all, didn't do anything, might as well have been thrown in the toilet. Because it wasn't put out along technological lines, do you follow? Therefore, the technology of PR is necessary because it forms one of the larger items in the budget of an administrator. It is big, and when it is neglected, you fail. And when it itself is bad, you also fail. So I am PRing the subject of PR to you. And I'm telling you that there has been a breakthrough in this field. I'm telling you that there is a technology. I'm telling you that you will find it absolutely vital, and that you certainly somewhere up the line in handling product and organization will collide with a situation which can only be handled by PR. And try as you will, you won't be able to get any further without the PR being handled. And you will have a hard enough time handling it even using all of PR. So when all seems too grim, and you can't seem to get your point across, and you can't seem to get your product, and it just won't organize that way, then you do have a tool, and that tool is called PR. And it has its own technology, and we have made a breakthrough in this subject, and I actually respect the fellows who have worked hard in this field to make standard technologies extant. They are most overlooked by their own brethren. So, all the
technology there is in this field is adaptable, providing you know what the subject is for, which the PR man doesn't. Isn't that remarkable?
All right, this